Well, let's talk the government's industrial relations changes. We already have a Fair Work Act that's 1,200 pages long, and the opposition's claim that Workplace Relations Minister Tony Burke's IR changes just makes life even more complicated for business, and small business in particular, appears backed up by the fact we have this new bill here, which is 284 pages long, and an explanatory memorandum attached to the bill, which is a whopping 521 pages long. Now, the Coalition Party Room decided today, as I understand it, to blanket oppose the bill, not even seek to amend it. They're going to block the bill outright or attempt to in the Senate. So the Greens and crossbenchers will have to pass this legislation if it's to get through. I spoke a short time ago to the Workplace Relations Minister, Tony Burke. Tony Burke, thanks so much for your time.
Great to be able to have a talk.
Here's your bill. It's pretty heavy. And that's we've already got 1,200 pages of a Fair Work Act. This is 280 or something pages. And the explanatory memorandum's 500 pages. So isn't this a lawyer's picnic you're creating here?
If you don't want to give anyone any rights, you just keep a blank page. Yeah, if you're going to give people rights, then you've got to put words on the page. And the thing that this bill does is it looks at people who've had no rights at all. Like a lot of people, if you think, who do we have an award system for? Who are the sorts of people that we should have minimum standards for? The people you see out doing food delivery would probably be at the start of the list. Yeah, low-paid workers, what are their minimum standards? Answer at the moment, none. So, yeah, you do have to add a lot of words to the page where you're giving rights to people where they currently don't have them. And that's what it means when you close loopholes.
It's a pretty long explanatory memorandum, though. Doesn't it show, just how much small business employers are going to have to deal with when it comes to the Fair Work Commission and whether they're caught by this thing or not?
Look, a lot of what's in there, when you have the consultation, there's a number of areas where we've been asked in consultation, sometimes by unions, probably most of the time by business, to add different sections to the explanatory memorandum in order to clarify issues that they wanted clarified. And in that, there's actually two documents in the explanatory memorandum. The other's a regulatory impact statement, which goes through all the various, they're broad estimates, but the estimates of compliance and things like that.
But it shows how complex it is, doesn't it? It's real complexity to the system that you're adding.
It shows how much we're adding to the system. Like at the moment, to give someone no rights is really simple. So a gig worker at the moment, the question is, are you an employee? The answer's no. All their rights fall off a cliff. For them, the Fair Work Act is a blank page. To establish minimum standards for them means you do have to add a whole lot of principles. But this is a decision you make as a country when you decide whether or not you want to be a country where low-paid workers have to rely on tips to make ends meet. And if you think you need to have minimum standards, then you end up with legislation.
All right. Well, speaking of the regulatory impact statement, there's kind of a $9 billion cost to business in there. Do you see that as conservative, given that just relates to two areas of your reforms?
Well, first of all, you've given a figure that's over 10 years.
Yes.
And you compare that to the wages budget in Australia. This is less than 0.1% of the wages budget. So in terms of cost, what that number actually says is it's exactly as I've been telling people it would be. Most businesses don't use the loopholes. Most businesses, this legislation won't make a difference for them.
But you can see it's larger than $9 billion over 10 years, though.
I don't accept that.
Okay.
But for the small number of businesses that do use the loopholes, there are workers being underpaid by a lot. By a lot. Like that figure simply we're not introducing rates of pay beyond what has been a community standard. We're simply bringing people up to what has been a community standard. So every dollar that's represented there is a dollar that at the moment a worker is underpaid. None of this is a cost to the economy. It's just where currently there are certain employers, a small minority, but certain employers who are doing what in any other circumstance would be underpaying workers. We're bringing them up to the mark.
But some of these reforms will drive up prices, won't they?
Look, the only one where there'd be a modest pass-through, I have to say, would be the issue of something like food delivery, because, underpaying people's cheaper. But have a look at how much there. So there was a Victorian inquiry into the on-demand economy that compared delivery riders versus if you're employed under the award. And they said it was in the order, depending on which award you matched them up with, between $3 and $4 an hour. Now, if a rider's doing between 4 and 6 deliveries an hour, you're not talking about a significant impost on the consumer. So, yeah, it is something, but, underpayment is the cheapest method. And if we think we're in a nation where there should be some minimum standards, we can't say we'll have minimum standards for everyone except the most vulnerable people.
Sure. The 67,000 workers figure for how many will be affected by the labour hire changes, how'd you come up with that?
Well, the department comes over. It's independent from the minister, as it should be. What they did with that was they would have looked through business consultation as to what were the principal industries that were engaging in the labour hire loophole. And it's principally mining and aviation. Most businesses don't have enterprise agreements. Those that do don't tend to use this loophole. Sometimes it's because the agreement's not a lot above the award. A lot of times it's just because the employer has made a decision, well, we've agreed to those rates of pay, and we're going to keep our word, we're not going to undercut them.
Why are you throwing out the High Court definition of casuals and independent contractors?
We're keeping the concept of there being a firm advance commitment. A whole lot of part-timers no longer work completely rigid hours. And so we couldn't end up, I don't think logically, with a situation where you had stricter rules on casuals than you have these days for part-timers. So we've turned it into a test that's effectively looking at what's really going on. And if these hours, and you've got the firm advance commitment, and these hours can be credibly and easily transferred across to a secure job, then it's something the employer can clearly do. And if the worker wants it, it's life-changing. I mean, try getting a mortgage if you've got a casual job.
I understand. The Minerals Council boss, Tanya Constable, called these laws extreme last night. She says the figure of 67,000 barely scratches the surface. And she says these laws will apply to thousands of other service contractors and other workers. Do you deny that?
Completely. Completely. Service contractors have been deliberately excluded. Deliberately excluded. Now, the only service
she just hasn't read the bill properly, or she hasn't got proper advice, or what? You say she's wrong?
Well, look, they ran an ad campaign that they knew was wrong. So I don't know if misinformation's part of their strategy. I don't know. But this is wrong on the face of it. Her organisation have had access to the draft bill. They complained that they got access early and said, they wanted it to be public. It's now public. They're still providing information that's not accurate. Only she can answer why she's doing that. But the fact is, service contractors are carved out unless, and we needed to have this unless the service you're providing is effectively labour hire.
Right. How much of a role has the TWU had in this change around the road transport industry?
They
asked for it, or?
They were the group that brought people together. So I've got to say, initially when it was put to me about revisiting the road transport issues, there was a reluctance.
Right.
And you can understand the history as to why we weren't sure that this could be done.
But you went there?
We went there. I was surprised during the Jobs and Skills Summit. I held a round table. And there's people around the table who had railed in 2016 against the old RSRT, the old Transport Tribunal, saying it had to be abolished. And they were saying, if you put the right safeguards in, then there was something that they wanted.
Who?
They said, if you go too far, then we're out.
Right. Who said that?
I don't have the names of it, but some of them were at the media conference with me today.
This is what the ACCI said about this. Owner drivers will again lose the flexibility to set their rates and conditions, and this will hurt remote and regional communities. They accuse you of handing over control of our supply chains to the Fair Work Commission. What do you say to that?
We're putting in, well, I disagree obviously, but we're putting in the Fair Work Commission here something that we don't do for any other industry, which is to effectively have a tripartite body that works as an advisory body. So you've got a group there that works with the President as the Fair Work Commission's considering what's an area where we might put down a minimum standard. So minimum standards don't just start tripping off day after day under here. There is a huge process with direct industry involvement to be able to say, here's one you might be going down a path, we don't want you to go there.
How will Qantas and BHP have to change their practices and labour arrangements because of this?
They can keep the exact arrangements they've got in terms of how they employ people, but it won't be cheaper to use a labour hire arrangement.
So they'll have to lift people's wages who they hire under labour hire conditions.
That's right. That's right. So you'd still
does that include people? Is it grandfathered? Does that include stewards and hostesses that they're employing now under labour hire? They'll
That's
have to
right.
lift their wages immediately?
Well, it doesn't take that part
Or
of the
it's
act wouldn't
grandfathered.
start till the 1st of November, but
Yeah.
it would apply to existing workers as well.
Has Alan Joyce lobbied you over this?
Oh, all the different businesses lobbied over this, didn't want it to happen. It will cost some money.
And what did you say to Alan Joyce?
We made an election commitment for good reason.
What's your reaction to his resignation?
Oh, look, it had been flagged well in advance that this was coming, so I made some comments straight away. My priority is very much with the workforce. I just want to be doing what we do right now to make sure that the workforce are properly paid.
What's your view on the way he's run the company in particular, with labour hire particularly in mind?
Look, I wouldn't be closing down labour hire loopholes if I approved of them. Qantas is one of the companies that's used labour hire loopholes. I don't think it's the right thing to do.
Have they been a big inspiration in these laws, their practices?
Look, they're one of the companies that's used it. The inspiration is simply a concept of fairness. If you agree to a rate of pay, you don't turn around the next day and undercut it.
On The Voice, the news poll this week, for those who are for the Yes campaign, can only be described as disastrous. Does it mean you're going to lose?
It means most Australians still haven't engaged. Look, this is as the PM was saying earlier today in a conversation, he was going through, people say, historically we've never got there without bipartisan support, and that's true. But, earlier this year people were saying no government had ever won a seat from the opposition at a by-election. And Mary Doyle was there sitting in the caucus meeting today.
Two-party preferred wasn't at 38 any time in that contest.
It's hard to win any referendum.
Finally, Peter Dutton's call for a second referendum. What do you make of that?
Oh, it's weird. It's one of the weirdest calls I've seen. Like, he says at one breath, we're spending too much time on this issue, and then in the next breath says, but let's keep spending more time on it for at least the next 3 years. And if you vote no, you're all going to have to vote again. He rejected the apology on the basis that it was symbolic, and now says, he'll only support if it's only symbolic. He doesn't want anything practical. Look, there's only one common mantra that we're getting there from Peter Dutton, which is to say no matter which angle something comes at him. I think he has underestimated a whole lot of the goodwill and generosity that will come from Liberal voters in this referendum. And there's a good number of Liberals who are out there handing out yes pamphlets, out there campaigning with us. This goes a long way beyond politics.
Workplace Relations Minister Tony Burke, thanks so much for your time.
Great to talk.